How you doing? Welcome to Unlearn 16 classes in session. Today I have Tom Powell, who is this amazing political TikToker who makes me laugh pretty much every day. How you doing, Tom?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm doing great. I invited Tom on mostly to tell him why Canada is better than the United States, but we both love politics. We both love history. I think we have a healthy sense of debate. I know that I'm a little more left than Tom. And I think having this fun discussion will be, worth it. Can I ask you a question before we start?
Absolutely.
Favorite president?
Okay, so my favorite president is probably Obama.
Okay.
I think.
Why?
Well, I view Obama as kind of. I view him more so than Bill Clinton or George Bush as the everyman. I know that a lot of people down here don't because of his name, because of the color of his skin and whatnot, but he really is the kind of guy that you're going to run into at the Frogurt shop. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He really is just a down-to-earth guy. And I'm pretty fond of the fact that we got out of 8 years with 0 indictments. That makes him a favorite of mine, but he just seems easy to talk to. I think the best president is Lincoln, and the most effective president is probably FDR, followed by Nixon.
Interesting. See, can you try to guess at my favorite president? And it's not anyone you've already mentioned.
So, favorite U.S. president down here?
Yeah.
Van Buren. No clue.
Alvin Coolidge. No, it is Teddy Roosevelt.
Oh, okay, the Rough Rider.
I'm a big Teddy Roosevelt fan, and I'm a big Teddy Roosevelt fan for a number of reasons. Number one, he wrote his PhD thesis on women's suffrage before it was cool to talk about women's suffrage. His conservation ideas, the fact that he had a military history and was serving as president, I have a respect for that. If you're going to be the commander-in-chief of your army, I have a respect for people that have served. And so, I think there was a lot of forward thinking. I liked his progressives. I like that sort of progressive nature and pragmatism in the area, rather than somebody I feel as though is incredibly, other politicians who are incredibly dogmatic, which is why we find ourselves where we find ourselves today, right? I think there's so many people that are tied to, they're tied to what their party is and what and survival of their party, and they've chucked out the window the what are we protecting here? You're just protecting a party.
You got to go back to Lincoln, team of rivals. Right? That's where that stuff started to come into play. Exactly what you're talking about, right? We're going to take in ideas. Was the movie with forgive me, Primary Colors, John Travolta?
Yes, great movie. Okay. That was that's about Clinton, right?
Yeah, it was sort of based on Clinton, roughly.
Loosely.
If you recall, when he was in the primary process in that movie, still dealing with the other Democrats that he was trying to unseat, in one of the debates with 2 other gentlemen, he agreed with both of them on a certain subject, and then one of them looked at him and said, "So what, if anything, are you against?" And he had one of the greatest lines. He goes, "I'm against dismissing any idea just because I didn't come up with it." You don't hear that anymore.
Right. Why? And then we have this in Canada. This is going on in Canada a lot right now. I feel as though it's obviously more easily divisive in the United States because you guys only have 2 parties. Whereas up here, we have a few, right? So it makes it a little harder just to stand against because you got to be clear about who you stand against, in order. But this frustration that everybody has, which is why I would love to have more right-wing, guests on this show to talk about all of these different issues in a calm, intellectually driven, respectful debate. I'm not going to have a respectful debate about whether it's okay to be discriminatory. No, that's just garbage. You can step over there. That's not the point. But a lot of the other things I think are incredibly important. And you say that you think that began in Lincoln's era. I remember reading about Washington, and when Washington was president, when they started forming political parties, he's like, no, you guys have screwed it up. This is it. This is the end of a true democracy. As soon as you've drawn lines, and I realized the parties had changed, but as soon as you draw lines and you make camps, people just want their team to win. They no longer want the good idea to win.
It's what we have right now. It's all about. Right now. We've moved past political policy differences, and we've moved into W's and L's. We're just racking up W's and L's. Who's got more? We won, you lost. Can I pause the conversation really quickly just to say that because I don't have an opportunity other than when I'm on vacation to speak to a lot of Canadians, I dig the way you say against.
Against?
Yeah,
do I say it funny?
No, just it's an accent to us because we say against, and you say against. So there's a little bit of a Canadian. You put that thing on it. I like it.
It's funny because I pick up intonations super easily. So wherever I'm traveling, a lot of people who are Canadian think I'm American, because as soon as I go anywhere, I pick up, any sort of cadence to a speech or anything like that. Sometimes to the point, I think, where people think I might be mocking, but I never am. It's just, I just pick it up and I start to mimic it a little bit.
I have a tinge of that in me. I spent some years in Southern Indiana, and you hear me talking on my videos. I'm very. I don't think I need to express to people that I'm from Chicago. I think my voice says I'm from Chicago, the way I say it.
Right.
But as soon as I cross that border with my wife and we're back down visiting family, well, all of a sudden I'm talking like I was back when I was in high school. Let me tell you something. And you put this face and that accent together, and you'd think I was out there voting for Trump every day of the week.
Yeah.
We can throw in some props to just round it out a little bit.
Oh my God, I can't. That's a lot. I think you should. No, you should have to leave that on.
You told me you were going to teach me how America.
I'm going to teach. I got to teach you a little bit. So let's start at the beginning. We'll start at the beginning here, right? We'll start at the beginning. So Canada, for those who are listening, Canada has a parliamentary democracy. The United States has a republican democracy. One is based on the fusion of powers. The other one's based on a separation of powers. And I like to joke that the United States is built on the fact that you can never get anything done in the United States. And Canada is built on the fact that if we elect somebody with a majority, we've elected a dictator for 5 years and they can do whatever the hell they want.
Okay, fair enough.
Some of the fundamentals.
Yeah, right? I can't argue with our end of it. Yeah, we get very little done.
Inside the United States, right? Outside the United States, it's a different kettle of fish. So when we're talking about democracies, here are some of the bigger, I guess, differences between Canada and the United States. So you have the United States president elected every 4 years on the dot. Canadian prime ministers are elected every 5 years unless a new election is called. So they can get elected earlier. They can call an election earlier. Canadian, you can be a prime minister 1,700 terms. America, you get 2, right? We both have you have a House of Representatives. We have a House of Commons. You guys stay for 2 years, which I think is insane. Our House of Commons stays for 5. You guys have an elected Senate, 6-year term. Our senators get appointed and they stay till they're 75.
Really? Okay. I did not know that.
Yeah. And we both have an appointed Supreme Court.
Okay.
So there you go. There's the overview of the American and Canadian system.
With the exception the exception of the fact that you have more options than we do when you go to the polling booth.
Oh, yeah. Politically, absolutely. I think politically we have a wider variety of options, even though, just so you know, there's only been 2 political parties that have ever been prime minister and had a majority government federally. So the smaller parties that we have, the NDP, even the Bloc Québécois, they've been premiers, so they've led provinces, kind of like your governors, but they've never run the country. So really, we've only ever had 2 parties run the country. Okay.
Now, do you call them premiers?
Premier is like your governor. In
your country, is it very similar to ours in that governor is probably the single biggest stepping stone to president, in that you get, when you're a governor in the United States of America, you're essentially doing what the president does on a smaller scale. You're running a state. You get executive experience. You're the commander in chief of your state's National Guard. That in this country is viewed as the single biggest qualifying experience to get the president nowadays.
Yeah. And I think the reason why it's so different in Canada and the United States is very, very simple. You guys are a republic made up of individual states with a heck of a lot of power, which is both the reason you were formed, and I think one of the reasons why it's so hard to function as a, as a cohesive entity. Whereas in Canada, we're a much more federalist style of government, meaning our federal government has a lot more power than our provincial ones do. For example, you guys would have capital punishment depending on the state. That is a federal law in Canada, whether it is or isn't. We don't have capital punishment. That was, we got rid of that in the 70s. But we have criminal law that is consistent across Canada.
Did you just glitch out on me?
I don't think so.
Go on. My screen just glitched. We're all good. Yeah. Carry on.
So it's consistent across Canada, whereas I think your individual states have a boatload of power.
They have too much power, right? In my opinion.
Right. So so you would push more towards more of a federalist style, a little bit more power to your federal government as opposed to your state government. Why?
I would prefer it. I mean, there was a line, once again, I like to go to movies, I apologize, but National Treasure with Nick Cage.
Whoa, wait, hold on. Listen, you can quote all the movies you want, but I love the fact that you're going to pull something from National...
You know the movie, right? Okay.
Of course I know the movie. I'm dying to know where you're going to...
Once again,
the stolen Constitution.
The scene when they're in the dressing rooms opposite one another and they're having their first real conversation. Nicolas Cage and the female, I forget the actress's name.
Okay.
And he's giving his basic philosophy of the United States. And he says,
right,
we don't say the United States are, we say the United States is. We're one nation. No longer is it the United States are. It's not a team of miniature states anymore. And that's the way I look at it. I know it's just one line from one silly movie, but he nailed it. Nobody says the United States are. He says the United States is, as if we were one entity. But then when you get down into the meat of the situation, they don't look at us as one entity. They look at us as 50 individual entities. And personally, I just think that is a very dangerous way to run a nation. I know it's helped us succeed, but I think it's time that we look beyond that way of governance because it is really starting to be detrimental to our overall health and safety.
I absolutely agree. And I mean, when I look at, so I teach American history up here. It's one of the courses that I teach in high school. And when we looked at the Articles of Confederation versus the Constitution itself, not only did the Constitution itself give a lot of power to the state, but the Articles of Confederation really did want way more power to individual states than they even got. So when people talk about the divisions in American society, and they always cite the Civil War, I'm like, I don't think you're getting it. It was built on division. It was built that we're going to bind as 13 colonies because we have this external oppressor that we're worried about stepping back over here. But we really want to control our own, backyard, whether it's North Carolina or Virginia or whoever it happens to be, rather than forming as a nation. Now, Canada has a similar murky history in the sense that a big reason Canada became Canada in 1867, we were all terrified of what you all were doing during the Civil War. So we thought if the North lost, the North was going to be like, oh, don't worry, there's some more land just north of us. We're just going to go pick that up. So we had 4 provinces forge an alliance kind of under the same auspice, meaning we're really afraid of an outside aggressor stepping up here and taking us over. So we're going to forge some kind of an alliance. And I think both of those birthrights are incredibly problematic.
And I understand at the time that our nation was, forgive me, stolen. I know that we always like to talk about how it was formed. We stole it.
Oh, absolutely.
At the time,
as was ours.
At the time our nation was stolen and we formed a new government on it, I understand the need to have some individual powers in the individual states as we were an up and coming nation that was trying to find its own way. But there's a reason why those same founding fathers did form this overarching federal government. And it's right there in the Constitution that so many people overlook. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, and it goes on to talk about promote the domestic tranquility, the general welfare. I mean, it is a federal government that was formed for the betterment of all people, not just separating people out into these little groups called states. It was meant to kind of bring people together while giving some power to the states. And it really is amazing how we have this argument down here about states' rights, depending on what the issue is, right? If the issue suits the argument, then states' rights are really called for. But if all of a sudden you need the federal government to step in for you, then all of a sudden you don't give a damn about states' rights.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I find that it's really that division. Now I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I find a lot of Americans tend to not just stay within their state, but within their city, within their town, within their county. Like I've met a lot of Americans who are like, listen, I don't need to go outside of, this 100-mile radius, which tends to beget and I think create, just like it would in Canada, different places that we're talking about. When you never step outside of where you were born and raised and love, your, let's say, vision tends to be a little more tunnel vision than anyone else. And how could you possibly understand? Like, Americans are always surprised when I say we do American history because, you all aren't throwing down some Canadian history down there, I don't think. Um, but I'll come down. Listen, if you have a high school, I'll come down. I'll make sure they're all good on Canadian history. But the point is that when we fixate on our own history and we don't fixate on something a little bit more international, a little bit global, that tunnel vision is pretty damning.
Not only is it damning, but it's so corrosive to the mind. Think about how many people think that the United States of America is the greatest country on earth just because they've been programmed to believe so. Dude,
yeah,
you're going to live fewer years than other nations. You're going to earn less money than other nations. You're going to be less content with your life. You're going to be less healthy in the United States. What part is great? I mean, don't get me wrong. We're phenomenal at kicking other nations' ass and locking our own people up. Outside of that, where are we great?
Right.
So
why do you think people, and this is what I find fantastic, because I teach, again, talking about Canadian history, I love the country in which I live, but I will be the first person to speak about the Indigenous genocide that we committed. I'll be the first person to speak about how our government was slow to empower women and to empower minorities, and to, even though everybody talks about, oh, Canada was the end of the Underground Railway, but nobody talks about what happened to them when they got here. Right? They move into areas, and the white population in places like Orangeville burn down Black communities' homes and businesses and threaten them until they leave. That was Canada. Everybody, let's not talk about it as it's all roses and, puppy dogs up here, because that's not the way it was. But when we talk about those things and people say, oh, it used to be great, and I'm not trying to evoke Donald in this conversation, because let's be honest, he stole it from Reagan. But I'm not trying to evoke the whole America was great thing. But where do you think that, because that's a strong thing for people, that whole remember when kind of mentality. And it's Reagan was smart when he tapped into it, because it's really friggin' smart. Why do you think that people are so drawn to the remember the good old days?
Well, I think because we all look around at our youth with some kind of nostalgia, right? Everybody does.
Absolutely.
I had, as you know from following me, an absolutely horrendous youth. But there were still pockets of it that were phenomenal. Like we're coming up on the holidays, right? I talk often about the holidays. It's one of those glimmering moments in my childhood that I can hold on to. And so those are things that I hearken back to. And when I smell something that reminds me of a good time when I was a kid, and what happens is in your life, you have those good times and things are always the way they are. My 17-year-old is going through this right now. So my 17-year-old is infinitely more intellectual than I will ever be, right? I'm a high school dropout. never went to a lick of college. She attends a STEM boarding school for super smart kids that are one day going to land something on Mars. Right? It's for kids that are going to go to
Right.
college
Right.
specifically to go into a career for math and science. Right? So she's way more intellectually smart than I am, and she's starting to see this. Well, it's not the way it was last year. It's not the way it was. Dad, why are we changing up this about the holiday? It's not the way it always was because things changed with it. So at 17, she's already beginning to get nostalgic. By the time you're 50, what happens? You're paying bills, you got a mortgage, you're starting to get ailments, you're arguing with the old lady, the car breaks down, and you look around and you go, life was simpler. Hey,
Right.
remember when? Remember when the only thing I had to worry about was a 68-cent pack of smokes I got out of the vending machine that I rolled up in my left sleeve, and I walked on the train tracks into town? Man, life was simple.
Well, I'm sorry. Did you grow up and Stand By Me? What? What?
A little bit.
This
A little bit.
close?
I did. I literally,
Okay. All right.
freshman year of high school, I did roll a pack of cigarettes up in my left sleeve every day.
There you go.
What did you do?
It's a solid look. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm holding on to these glasses, right? These are glasses when I was a kid in the 80s. This is what McDonald's would give it. First of all, McDonald's has really dropped the damn ball because they don't give away stuff like this anymore. But you hold on to things, as an adult, I'm sort of trying to reclaim my youth, whether it's in toys, whether it's in a t-shirt. I just I am 46. I just bought a Sesame Street t-shirt. What does that say?
Remember the scratch and sniff stickers?
This is what I'm saying.
That's the
what
piece of scratch and sniff.
I just want some things back. I just bought I don't know if you remember the Sesame Street little clip where it's this little girl, her mom gives her money and she's supposed to walk to the store and she's supposed to get a loaf of bread, a quart of milk, and a stick of butter, right? And that voice of that little girl and I saw this t-shirt, Tom, and I'm like, I don't care what they could have asked me $150 for this t-shirt and I was buying it. And I think that's what some politicians, unfortunately, are really playing on. When in actuality, sure, I miss,
So
I
I'm
miss
just taking
Sesame
notes on
Street.
what shirts to put in my store and what to charge for them.
I'm telling you,
I'm with you.
you can sell childhood for anything.
Every
anything.
time new shirts arrive, my wife's like, "What's the new shirt?" Right? Not that she's bitching. She's like, "Do you get more new shirts?" And I'm like, "Look at it. It's the Schoolhouse Rock shirt. How could I not get it?"
I'm gonna go get mine. I have a Schoolhouse Rock shirt in my drawer right now.
Right.
I have a shirt that has, you remember like Frankenberry, Count Chocula, Boo Berry?
I got Boo Berry in the closet. Yeah, in the pantry.
I have a whole shirt. I have boxes of cereal that somehow I've managed to get from that.
And that's
Look,
what
we buy back, and I think these politicians are playing on that.
They know that you're nostalgic for easier times. They know that life is not easy for the average everyday Joe, and they know, at least I think, that. And I'm trying not to be snotty about this, so hopefully it comes out right. They know that not everybody just lets shit roll off their back. Excuse my language. They know that when people get into their 30s and 40s, if they haven't become the middle linebacker of the Chicago Bears or the prima ballerina like they thought they were going to be when they were 13, all of a sudden they start to get angry about life. Whereas I've always been somebody that was like, I live in a 4-bedroom, 2.5-bath ranch, and I think I'm living in a palace. Everybody's like, "Did you want your second home? You're still in your starter home." Starter home? I lived in a tent for 4 years. And then the home I lived in when I was a kid was a shack. This is I got carpeting and central air. I'm living the dream.
Yeah. I'm good to go. Right. Do you think, okay, so politicians play, and I think in a lot of ways they play on that nostalgia, but when you really look at that era, and I often say this to people when they say, "Oh, we had it better." Like, forget Trump and all of that garbage. Ignore him for a second. Let's say that a lot of people, no matter what political party they belong to, they can remember their childhood and they think, "Oh, they were just better times." But what you understand about that, if you can sort of articulate it, is they were better times because as a kid, you had no idea about what was going on politically, none.
Or socially.
And if you were a kid that was white and straight, growing up in that time. You got to walk around, even if you were poor, like poverty brought or lower economic standing had some limitations, but for the most part, you got to walk around and still, eat the blueberry cereal or whatever the hell you're doing. And you had this idea of nostalgia. But when people say it was so great, I'm like, when was it great? Was it great when women couldn't vote? Was it great when you were allowed to beat the heck out of your wife and kids? Was it great when, I just really read about Ruby Bridges because I think we have a lot of these symbols all the time. And we're like, oh, yeah, remember when Ruby Bridges was, the first kid to go into school in New Orleans. Sorry, I say that wrong every single time. People get mad at me. I think you're supposed to say New Orleans, right? There's like no.
Well, technically, it's more like a New Orleans.
New Orleans, right.
But it's New Orleans. Yeah.
I'm not cool enough for that yet. I'm going to build to it. But when I was actually, because we use these figures and we just tell their 5-minute story, but like nobody understands this little kid in kindergarten had to write a test to see if she could go to the white school. And then only 6 kids got to go. Want to know why? Because the rest of the African-American population wasn't actually getting educated. And then all the teachers quit. Nobody talks about the whole story. And then she sat alone in that classroom for the whole year.
Now you understand why CRT is such a flashpoint right now, because the people who did bad things, people who look exactly like me, don't want that story told. And what you're seeing in the United States of America right now, I believe, is this: you're seeing ember flare-ups. Okay, so for the longest time, white straight Christians ran everything. And then women began to take control over their own voice. It became more acceptable to come out as who you actually are, whether that be gay, trans, bi, whatever the case may be. And people of color began to become more empowered and more proud of their background and standing on their own 2 feet. And more importantly, white people are slowly but surely becoming the minority. So what you're seeing is a nation that is slowly but surely going towards the progressive way, which I'm not a progressive. I like to see this progressive move. Slowly but surely going there, but we're having these flare-ups of these people who are losing their power, the people who are losing their majority. Right. And you get this flare-up and it's Trump. And then he gets put out and 81 million people come out and put that fire out, right? And we'll have another flare-up.
That's one hell of a flare-up, yeah.
We'll have another flare-up, you understand what I'm saying? But at some point in time, they are going to be the minority. And that's how people like Trump are able to sell this shit. So people like Trump do what you're saying. They play on the nostalgia, because what they're doing is now they're taking a group of people that are not only looking at nostalgia from, hey, this was just better when I was a kid because I didn't have bills, but they're looking at nostalgia and, hey, this was better when I was a kid because I didn't have pills. And I could tell you, the black guy, to go fuck himself. I'm sorry. But I'm sorry. I apologize.
That's right.
But you know what I'm saying? They're missing those times. My father was the example.
Yeah.
My father died in 2015, and he refused to vote for Barack Obama because he said it's called the White House for a reason.
Ooh,
my father told my children that the only black man that should ever be in the White House is the one serving the real president of the United States. And here's the problem with that. My father aligned with Barack Obama's policies almost 100%. When I sat down and talked with my father, and I asked him, my father doesn't care who gets married, thinks that college should be free, thinks that everybody should have the Medicare he had. He goes, it's great health insurance. Everybody should have this. That's right. Obama, Dad. Yeah, it doesn't matter. He's black.
Right.
He would tell me flat out, he's black. It doesn't matter.
It's so I'm reading the Ruby Bridges story, and I was talking about it with my partner. I'm just like, it's just so insane. And she said something that's just so incredibly important. She goes, because we were talking about the white mothers predominantly that would stand in front of the school and swear at this little girl and hold up dead African-American babies in coffins, like toys, you know what I mean? Like faking that. The girl was 6. And Anna said, can you imagine what level of brainwashing and manipulation and societal damage that has to be done to that white population in order to put you there, in order to in your head think it's acceptable, not only just acceptable, they probably thought they were doing whatever their country needed them to do, to stand outside a grade 1 classroom and try to terrorize this little girl. And I said, and that's why that's only 61 years ago. And I said, well, that's why CRT is so incredibly important, because we're not done with the brainwashing.
Well, think about this. Those white parents. You said your partner was asking about the white mothers.
Yeah.
61 years ago. Who raised those white mothers? Those white mothers were raised by the people who finished off the genocide of the Native Americans.
Absolutely.
Those white mothers were raised by people who were like, Bill Burr did a bit about this, and I like to go to movies and comedy, but Bill Burr did a bit about this, about how the owner from the Clippers, who had the racist tirade about his girlfriend hanging out with black guys, he's like, okay, it's horrible, and he's got to go, but were you surprised? He was raised by somebody that would be like teaching him his ABCs, like A, B, C, D, get that engine off my lawn, E, F, G. Yeah. The first 12 years of his life, baseball in the United States was all white and nobody cared. So those people 61 years ago who were maybe in their 20s and 30s back then yelling at this little girl, they were raised by people who genocided a race. Mm-hmm. So they were raised with just pure racism. It is just taken us generations and decades to get that squeezed out of the system. My kids are probably the first ones. My kids, my cousin's kids in Southern Indiana are the first ones that aren't running around using the N-word in my family.
Wow. But look at that. And the fact that, and this is what kills me actually, and we see it up here to a certain degree, but to a lesser degree because our history is a little bit different. But what kills me is the fact that people can't talk about that, admit that, own that, but still not, like, I'm not responsible for my dad. I'm not responsible for my grandparents, but I am responsible for me. And if I don't recognize who they were and why they were, how in the hell does it ever really change? Like, my grandma's 96. Do you think things that like racist crap hasn't come out of her mouth? Of course it has. Then that's my job to fix it. That's my job. That's my job to sit my grandma down respectfully and say, cut it out. That's enough, right? It's my job to bring people into my grandmother's life so she doesn't get to live in this bubble of this very Christian white world, and she's never known any different. And all of a sudden, she's meeting people who are African American, who are Asian, who are obviously gay, and her worldview has to change. And that's what it's about. It's not about, like, it just kills me when people are like, well, it's just trying to make all these white kids guilty. No.
What I find down here, especially in I don't know if you're aware of this, but I live in even though I live in the suburbs of the third largest city in the nation, I live on the fringe of the suburbs, so I live in a very red town. It's a Trump town. And out here, what I find is that, so we're talking about trying to figure out how the best way to word this as to not aggravate anybody, because I don't want to ever rock the boat unless I'm having my boat rocked. What they're finding is that they're finding that loss of control, that loss of the majority, it means that they no longer get to whitewash their history. And if they no longer get to whitewash their history, then the end result of that, they believe, is that they're going to be blamed for everything that happened. And at the end of the day, the people of color in this country don't want to blame me for what happened. All they want out of me, at least the way I view it, and I may be completely wrong as I'm not a person of color, they want me to be able to say, A, it was wrong. B, it should never happen again. And C, I acknowledge that even though I didn't do shit, I still benefited from that system greatly. And I did. I am a straight, white, middle-aged, middle American male. I'm the safest human being on the planet. Banks want to loan me money. Employers want to hire me. You know what I mean? I got there because people like yourself have been stepped on throughout society to favor me. People who are gay, people who are trans, people who are women, people who are black, people who are Hispanic have been made to be second-class citizens so that the white straight males of America can be led to the front of the line. I'm a high school dropout that's living the dream because I've been handed every opportunity that everybody around me doesn't get.
And I think it's also fascinating. We talk about the birth of the United States, and again, we can compare it to Canada, and I can give you horror stories of this country too. But you talk about the beginnings of the United States. The beginnings of the United States, everybody talks about this bastion of capitalism, prosperity, and democracy, and it was none of that. It was fascist, flat out, and it was only 10% of your population could vote in the beginning. At the very beginning, very small. You needed to be white, male, and own property. That changed over time, but that wasn't the beginning of the United States. And nobody wants to talk about that. When you build a house on that foundation, it's faulty. It's cracked.
Actually, go back even further. We didn't start out as fascist. We started out as socialist. Jamestown, we were all in it together. It was a communal effort. It was, what was our national motto? E pluribus unum. It wasn't under God we trust. It was out of many one.
Right.
And we all came together. And that is something that you touch on. Well, no, it wasn't you. It was Cannon's Fodder. Do you follow Cannon's Fodder on TikTok?
Yes, I do.
So she really touched on this, and it didn't dawn on me the reality of this until she brought it up. My daughter's part of this generation, my 17-year-old daughter. I don't know how it is in Canada in your classroom, but up here, most of the work is now done in group project form. There's very little, you're going to go off and do your own thing anymore. And unlike Gen X group projects where it was always like there was the one guy that did all the work, and then there was the guy that was the funny one, and the guy that never showed up. And in today's day, these kids, it is all about making sure everybody is a rising tide lifts all boats. And so her group projects are all about making sure everybody succeeds. And what is happening is they're taking that mentality from the classroom and they're taking it to the polling place, and they're saying, we want government that recognizes the way we work in the classroom, which is communal. So they're leaning back into communism as it's written in the book without looking at the history of communism.
Yeah, not how it plays out.
Yeah.
Listen, you guys use the word communism down there like it's the worst four-letter word. You know what I mean? Oh, you're gay, you're a communist. Oh, you bought a glass from the South, you're a communist. Oh, you dated and it's amazing how quickly now, again, it's thrown out there by people on the extreme right
and left.
The left's screaming communism.
Well, the left will scream similar things. Like towards the right, they'll scream instead of like the right yells at me, communist and socialist. The left yells back, fascist and Nazi.
There we go, fascist and Nazi. But the underpinnings, and nobody really talks about the difference. First of all, nobody understands the difference between economic ideology and political, which I find hilarious. They keep interchanging the words as though they don't actually have any meaning. But you keep shouting these words at each other, and to the extremes, it might actually be true, but the extremes aren't what's running. I would like to think that's not what's running any country or any nation. I mean, and we've had extremists. It's not like we've never had extremists here. So we have a province in the West called Alberta, and Alberta historically, very smaller population. Toronto and Ontario is bigger population. Montreal and Quebec, bigger population, right? Very small. And there was a gentleman named James Keekstra teaching in Alberta for years. And the whole area was Christian. But you got to remember, this is pre-internet, right? I grew up in pre-internet. That was pre-internet. And these kids would go to class and he'd teach History 10, and every year he would teach that the Holocaust never happened. He'd bring books, Tom, and he'd put them on his desk, because there's tons of Holocaust denying books that have been published. He'd put them on his desk and he'd say, you know what? They exaggerated. They made up the numbers. The Nazis wanted to make themselves out to be more than they were. And then the Jewish population has used this forever to get... I don't even know how many classes he got through until one Jewish kid moves to that area of Alberta, sits down in his classroom, listens to this guy's lecture, and goes home and goes, excuse me? Now he gets put on trial. He gets fired. He said, it's my right, my civil right, free speech, yada, yada, yada. He gets fired, obviously, because free speech doesn't include hate speech. But we're not talking generations ago. So when people say that our curriculum matters and oversight matters and CRT matters, that's why. That's not that. That's in my era. That's in my era that garbage was still happening.
Yeah. You just said something that was rather interesting. You said that free speech does not include hate speech. Is that the law up there in Canada?
Yeah, and as it should be. And it only attests when we talk about, and most people understand this, when we talk about our fundamental freedoms, it's against the government. A lot of people don't understand that. They'll say, "Oh, Joanna, when I'm in public, you can't tell me to shut up. I have free speech." I'm like, listen, that's not what we're doing here. Our civil rights are protection of us against our government, not of everybody else in the world. But our government cannot have an undeniable level of power. And when a teacher is a representative of that government because they work for the government, there's the limitation.
Okay, so I'm trying to get to the crux of this. What is by law up there considered hate speech? That is
anything that incites just like down there, because you guys would have that and you would have hate crimes, but anything that incites or outrightly calls for violence and whatever. Okay, yeah, right? So denying the Holocaust would be hate speech.
Okay, so there's where I have the disconnect with you for just one moment on this topic. So down here, the term hate speech in America is somewhat similar, but we call what you're talking about incitement speech. It's incitement. Hate speech is just talking hateful about somebody else, which is utterly and completely protected by our First Amendment rights. Now, do I think that somebody who teaches the Holocaust is not real should have a job teaching? No, that person should be fired. But down here, like saying the Holocaust isn't real, that's not against the law. Is that against the law in Canada? Not teaching it, but just saying it. Is that illegal?
You mean a person on the street? No. You can't really do much about that. Okay. That's just their opinion. You can say, but again, if it's coming from the government, that's where the protection lies, right? You could write, if you want to write a book about such idiocy, go right ahead and see who publishes it.
We don't have a disconnect. I agree with you. The teacher should go. I thought you were.
It's just the language.
I just thought you were referring to like that type of hate speech should be illegal for everybody, just in common, everyday conversation.
But you know what's funny? You know where it is illegal, Tom? Germany.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And
how can and everybody points to Germany. And I've traveled to Germany, and their acknowledgement and ownership and education surrounding the Holocaust is impressive. If we all followed their lead from how they've responded to such an incredible, horrific atrocity, we would all be better people for it. I'll tell you a cool story. First of all, so you can't, anybody that denies the Holocaust in Germany, I don't know if it's an immediate jail or if it's an immediate fine, but it's illegal. Flat out. You cannot deny the Holocaust. When I went to Munich for the first time, I went to somewhere called the Hopferhaus, and it's this beer hall, very, very famous beer hall. It's where Hitler would have his rallies. And the whole thing was taken over by the Nazis, and there was Nazi everywhere, all on the ceiling. The walls were all painted with swastikas and all of this Nazi paraffin. It's just covered. And so I was on a tour with, a whole bunch of kids, and we went in there. And as we walked in, I knew the history a little bit. Most of my friends were all just going to go have, a really large beer. And I was kind of looking around at the place, and I was looking up at this beautifully, now the ceiling is this beautiful Michelangelo-esque mural. And I'm staring at the ceiling. And as I look up, I swear to God, Tom, I see a swastika. And I went, what the? And I started to sweat. I'm like, what is going on? And nobody else is noticing because they're all getting drunk already. And a gentleman who runs the place came up behind me, and he's like, do you mind if I talk to you for a second? I can see that you're looking at the ceiling. And I said, sure. He goes, have you noticed there's a few images that might be disturbing? I said, yeah, I did. And I don't feel very good about it. And he introduced himself, and he was the manager of the place or whatever. And he goes, well, this is the story. So he told me the story about how it was taken over. And then when, Hitler was gone and all of the restitutions were being made and they were making these incredible transitions, he goes, we had a choice. And it's kind of a cool metaphor and real story. We had a choice. We could paint over it all, or we could paint over most of it, both physically and metaphorically, and leave up some of our painful, most disgusting pieces of our history so we will never forget. He said that swastika stays there, and it stays there to make people uncomfortable. It stays there to make us uncomfortable, because for the rest of all of our lives, we should always look back at that time as being horrific and, in the truest sense, never let it happen again to any other, not just to the Jewish community, but to anybody else. And Canada hasn't worked like that until very forcibly, very recently. We're starting to try to atone. The United States doesn't work like that. We have countries that just, sure, they'll acknowledge it in passing. We had slavery. No, you didn't just have slavery. Your country exists in a successful and powerful way because, right?
Yeah, we are not the nation we became if we did not kill off one race while enslaving another. It doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It just simply does not happen. And that's kind of the thing I was getting at before, right? Is that I don't need to sit here and be self-deprecating. I love my life. I'm very happy with my life. I don't walk around miserable all day long, but I need to be able to acknowledge the path I was given because of those things. Too many people don't want to do that because it's kind of like admitting that you didn't do any of this yourself. What was that thing under Obama? Right. You didn't build that. You still built your life. Right. You took advantages of everything that was in front of you. You didn't have say over what was put in front of you. You just need to acknowledge how it got put in front of you. If I'm handed the keys to a brand new Cadillac at 16, I don't get to drive around going, check it out, yo. You know what I mean? I got me a caddy. No, somebody gave me a caddy.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I just, and I think that that's true of the United States, and it's true of Canada in a lot of ways. But what makes, I think, most rational people very nervous are the extremes, are these extremes that can't sit down and have a rational conversation. Because you guys elected a new president, and legitimately, I'll say that, elected a new president. But you still have 70 million people walking around your country thinking that the other guy was a better choice. And to me, that division is one that needs to be fixed. And I only see one way to fix that. I don't see it, and a lot of people that listen to my podcast or listen to me on TikTok, I don't see it by yelling at the right. If you can't talk, if you can't keep your cool with the other side, then that division it'll bring down the whole house anyway.
I try to remain calm. I think you see that in my videos. It's not easy all the time, considering some of the things that we deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that is the way we need to continue to remain calm. The 71 million people, listen, everybody can go around thinking that their guy was the better choice. Right? I thought Hillary was the better choice for 4 years. The difference is you can think that he's a better choice without actively thinking that everything about that election was rigged, right? None of it's real. The guy's really not the real president. Okay, you know what? I despised Trump. I think that's pretty clear. But would I have loved for him to have done right by the country? I would have been right behind him when he did things that were good. When he made animal cruelty a felony. When he signed prison reform. When he banned bump stocks. I was like, yeah, go get him. I was on Facebook praising him. And people were like, wow, you're praising Trump. I'm like, because I agree with what he did.
A good idea. can still be a good
Yes.
idea. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess that's, and that's how I try to handle it. Now my page isn't quite even as political as yours, because I do diverge into a lot of social sort of political conversations. But when you get comments like "I love Trump" or "I hate Biden" or whatever, I say, listen, let's toss the men out of the equation. Tell me a policy you like. Tell me a policy that you hate. Let's talk about that. Because if you tell me something that we can debate that, and I don't need to agree with you on your policy, but we are raising these predominantly men and sometimes women to these icon level positions that, it, by the way, goes completely against what your country stands for. Ever, your whole country was created not to empower a king. That was the
It's
point.
tribalism. It's what seeped into our politics. And so,
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely, it
what
has.
I say to people nowadays is, because a lot of people ask, here's here's the thing. I do my page because I enjoy doing it. Yeah, I got books
Yeah.
to sell, but I'm not living off of this. I do it because I enjoy it. We live off of other things.
Yeah.
And so I don't understand how people are still coming to me, asking me about all these worldly events. I'm a retired landscaper with no high school diploma. Don't be asking me. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. What I get asked a lot of is, how do we get past the tribals? And so
Yeah.
the answer
Yeah.
I keep giving, because it's the only answer I can come up with, is instead of talking about, as you said, instead of talking about the politician, or even still instead of even talking about the policy, when you meet somebody from the other side of the political spectrum, before you ever talk anything politics with them, find out what they want in life. Don't find out what they want out of a politician. Don't find out what they want out of society. Find out what they want out of life. And 9 times out of 10, I believe what you're going to find is you're going to find somebody that's going to sit across from you and tell you the exact same things that you want. I want a safe community to live. I want a safe place to raise my kids if kids are part of the equation. I want to be able to earn my money and be left alone and live a happy life. And you'll find that one of the reasons why America, for all of its flaws and all of its downfalls, has worked is that what it is essentially is a conglomeration of people that all want that. We just
Hmm.
disagree on how to go about getting there, and the disagreement on how to go
Sure.
about getting there has just become so massively wide and tribal that we forgot that we all want the same thing. That's all we got to
Hmm.
start talking to people about. I Guy across the street, libertarian. Guy behind me, hardcore Trump supporter. Guy next to me, not political at all, but probably one of the most religious people I've ever met. As you know, I'm an atheist. So I'm surrounded by people that don't think like me. And we all get
Sure. Sure.
along great because we all want the same
Yeah.
thing. We all want this community to be safe and happy and successful. I don't care who you
Yeah.
voted for and what your policy differences are, as long as we can agree on the fundamental block of life that we want the same type of happiness, then we can start talking about policy. We moved beyond that, and now it's all about, as you said, well, your guy sucks. Well, no, your guy sucks. Well, no, your guy sucks. You know what? I'll tell you what, as you said, take the guys out of it. Yeah, you're talking to a 49-year-old white male. Take the guys out of it. Let the
Yeah.
women run the world, and let's see what happens.
You know what's funny about that? So speaking of TV and movies, and we should do a whole thing on movies, by
Sure.
the way, because I feel like we'd have a great conversation about that. But speaking of TV, so I've been watching the morning show. Have you watched the morning show at
Uh,
all? Jennifer
no.
Aniston. Okay, so the premise is the Me Too movement in a newsroom. It all goes to hell, and the women sort of get their, like, they're kind of taking back this power. But there's so much infighting. Here's my preach, not against giving women power, but here's my problem. A lot of the time, when you try to change the system from within, the system changes you. So we have a lot of very smart women playing a very stupid game. And when you play that game long enough, your sex, your gender identifiers, your skin color cease to matter, because you're still trying to play the broken game that was created years ago, rather than actually doing or saying what's right. My favorite quote is actually from your favorite president. And the quote goes something like, "I'd like to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky." This is why Lincoln can't be my favorite president, because I am so tired of that being true for every politician.
I believe me. I feel you. I live down here. It's aggravating.
It's true here.
It is just the level of that stuff that we see on the state level is enough to drive you mad, let alone taking that across the whole country. And just think about the political cycle in the United States of America does not ever stop. There is no.
Well, it can't. You guys are electing somebody every 5 minutes.
There is no more election season. It is all election season. You see, I don't know if you've ever stopped into any of my lives for any long period of time. What's one of the questions I get asked the most, other than the Qatar? Is who do you got in 24? Who do you got in 24? 24?
Right. Yeah.
Dude, we're not even in 22 yet. We got a whole midterm to get through. I can't even think about 24 yet.
Do you think that, like, and just to tap into this, do you think that your version of separation of powers and let's say electing people so often is detrimental to fundamental aspects of democracy? Meaning, if I'm elected for 2 years to Congress, I'm working for a year and running for a year. Do you think that is inherently problematic? And I'm trying to represent 800,000 people. Is that inherently problematic to a balance of democracy where, sure, we want elections and we want accountability, but we also need you to do your damn job?
Yeah, not the system isn't. It's what has crept into the system, right? And it's how these and I say guys because it's predominantly guys, how these guys get elected. And that's why I'm not in favor of changing the system, nor am I necessarily in favor of a big thing that's very popular down here is installing term limits. What I'm in favor of is just regulating Congress, right? Making sure that they can't collect money from outside their district or state when they're running, making sure that corporations and organizations can't, whatever. So if you reform them to the point where they can't get rich off the system and there's no money for them to go beg for, then they have to do their job and they're not beholden to anybody. Then you get the cream of the crop, in my opinion. You get people who actually want to serve rather than get powerful, which is what we have now. You enter Congress, you enter politics to gain power and money. If you can't gain money and power through Congress, then you're going to be the people who wants to serve. At least that's the way I hope it turns out.
But again, and then I come back to serve who and serve them how, right? Like if I'm a congressman in the United States, I'm representing approximately 800,000 people. How in God's green earth am I supposed to adequately, democratically, legitimately serve those people? I think even in that situation, we have and I'll go you one step further. When the majority of those people, as we're seeing in some of your states right now, want asinine things, let's say, right? Am I supposed to serve those people? Because the true democracy consistently has to balance majority rule and minority rights. And so when the majority of and a lot of the issue, a lot of people are talking about this last election and the elections that went on in Georgia and Virginia. They're saying, you want to know what your problem was? You had people telling us how to parent. I feel like that was a big thing. Who can use what bathrooms, what books there were supposed to have, and you had politicians step inside our classrooms when parents should have every right. But what happens when all the parents in that district don't want you to teach evolution?
Right. So that is a problem that happened in Virginia, okay? And it's something that's currently a flashpoint in the United States of America. So what we have right now is, okay, so I'm the parent of three kids. One of them that's out of school, one's in high school, probably somebody that you would wind up teaching, and then a fourth grade. And I have a ton of say when I go to my school board meetings. I'm a taxpayer, I'm a parent, I want my voice heard. But at the end of the day, the board gets to make the decision. And if I'm unhappy with the board, then it's my job and my duty to make sure that that board member is replaced in the next election. Now what we have are conservative right family members, the parents, that are no longer abiding by that system. we have groups of parents who are entering school board members and telling the school board, you guys are all placed under citizens arrest. We're removing you from power tonight, and we are this gentleman over here. He's going to go ahead and read these people into their swear them into your position without an election, without a ballot. This is happening in the United States of America because they disagree with what the board is doing. Why? Because the board is predominantly trying to have mask mandates. That's the thing. That's the big issue down here. CRT is really not even an issue. It's a college thing down here.
Yeah. It's masks. This whole, like, the worst thing we've ever done. You know how much my kids care about masks, Tom? None. They could give a flying poop. They don't care at all. They're kind of annoyed by it, but really don't
Kids
care.
down here looking at it as a fashion statement. What do you got on your?
They don't.
What mask do you got? What do you got on your mask? It is not. And down here, the argument is had all the time. My children, so my two daughters and my son, have talked to me infinitely more about mass shooter drills, active shooter drills, and hiding in bathrooms, and things that go on in the school in order to keep them safe than they ever did about masks, right? And
that's what I'm saying.
My 9-year-old goes to school and wears a mask all day long. Doesn't say boo about it, but when they do that drill, you better believe I hear about that drill that night.
There you go. I just feel like people have chosen certain things in order to reassert parental power. And what scares the crap out of me, even here, by the way. So here, and I know we're running out of time, but here in Ontario, so each province, different than you guys, each province decides on provincial curriculum. So elementary and high schools all have their curriculum sets by the Ministry of Education in the province. So every school follows the same curriculum. You might use different books to get at that curriculum, but you follow the same curriculum, which obviously I appreciate, even though I don't love some of the curriculum. But the premier that we have right now is fairly right wing, and he decided he didn't like the sex ed curriculum. So what did this guy do? He reverts to 1998. He goes, I'm wiping out the curriculum that we're using for sex ed now because it's too much and parents don't like it and parents are pulling their kid from the curriculum. We're going to go back to 1998. I'm like, 1998, when everybody was walking around saying the F word and not F-U-C-K with impunity? That curriculum? Are you crazy? Are you absolutely mad? And you have a bunch of parents saying, I don't want my kid learning that, whatever that is. Now, whether it's, gender diversity, whether it's trans rights, whether it's, whether you're talking about sexual education, you're including, same-sex and heterosexual couples in safe sex conversations. They're pulling their kids out. And this is where I have a problem, because what I promise you, Tom, is the parents that are pulling their kids out of sex ed ain't having the talk at home. They're just not getting it.
No, and that's
right.
I'm with you as far as the educational standards, right?
But where's the line between parent power and I'm a parent, I'm a taxpayer, and holy crap, you guys are backwards thinking, and you're flat out creating scary circumstances for your children, by the way, who aren't listening to you anyway. Where's that? That's a very interesting line for democracy, right?
Yeah, and as a parent, I want to have as much say as humanly possible. But as a parent, I also understand. I think I do anyway. The importance of an education for all, not an education for mine. Okay, what I want to teach my kids, I'll teach my kids after class at home. I'll teach my kids our way of doing things and how it melds with the way that society is teaching them in a classroom. But you need to have some type of universal standard. What people fail, I think, to understand is it's not just. So I try to look at it as not just my child, but look at it as that's the future workforce of my country. Right? This is the next generation that's going to keep this country going. I want them to be uniformly educated. I don't want kids coming out of Texas thinking that dinosaurs aren't real and the earth is 6,000 years old and going to college with kids coming out of New York that actually have a brainstem. I'm sorry to put it that way, but you know what I mean? It's like,
no, but that's not even their fault. Like that's those kids in Texas, whatever school, That's a detriment. You're putting an anvil around their neck and then sending them out into the
Yeah.
world and expecting them to be
So I worked for
successful.
a gentleman. And by the way, if you have a time limit, you let me know. I'm fine on time. Uh,
Oh, okay.
yeah, I'm
Okay.
fine. I worked for a gentleman, oddly enough, in the late '90s, early 2000s. Uh, that was a very hardcore right wing fundamental Christian. He belonged to one of these mega churches with 15,000 people in it, and whatever.
Right.
He didn't like the way the school taught the kids, so they homeschooled their kids. And he was very open with me about
Mhm.
what they taught their kids. And what they taught their kids was the state level curriculum for homeschooling, which met the regular school's level of teaching. And then his wife would teach them what was wrong about them, right? So they would teach them about dinosaurs. And then this one really stuck out with me. And then he said, and then we teach them that dinosaurs aren't real, that dinosaur bones are placed there by the devil to test our belief. And I said, wait, you taught your kids that? And he's like, well, that's what it is. The devil placed those things. Dinosaurs didn't exist. And I'm like, what? I,
I can't, like, it's so difficult to be respectful sometimes. And I want to be respectful. And then I almost some days look at it like abuse. Somebody's going to get really mad at me about that. But when you are handicapping your kids to that extent, and then expecting them to step out into the world and somehow function, it's
I, had,
it's a level I don't even know how to
I, I, I
fix
had a
it.
gentleman duet me this morning. And, whatever, I don't know when this is going to air, but the day that we're doing it, he duetted me this morning, Sunday morning, the 14th. And he basically said, you know what, I don't agree with a lot of the stuff you're saying, but I'm never going to call you out on, I want to listen to what you have to say, blah, blah, blah. Okay, it was a nice little message. It was a weird video. And then at the end of it, his little son, 3, 4, came into the video. It just kind of like wandered in the
Right.
video. And the guy goes, oh, and by the way, this is, and he rattled off the son's name, and he goes, he's the next little conservative. And I thought, well, how do you know that? Your
Because
child
I'll
hasn't
teach them that
developed
way.
their own personality yet. I, as a parent,
Yeah.
I'll tell you what I said. This is the exact quote. I'll never forget it. My first child was born, Magnolia, my oldest, my 20-year-old. I was in the hospital, and they handed her to me for the very first time. And I looked down at her, and I said, you are going to sit at the head of all tables. That's what I said to her. I wanted to instill in her a positive message right at the start, because I had a path planned out for her. This is what you're going to do with your life, and you are going to be
Sure,
great,
sure.
and you are going to be successful, and I'm going to be behind you, cheering
Right.
you on. And none of that has happened, because they develop their own personalities. To say your child is going to be X shows that you do not know human nature. Listen, I'm a
Yeah.
hippie that wears sandals, is covered in tattoos, and didn't graduate from high school, and can't even really bring himself to put on pants most days. My son's 9 and goes to school in a bow tie
It's
because he loves
amazing.
them. He's got
I
13
love
bow
it.
ties at
I wish I
9.
knew how to tie one.
He's great. Just let your kids, to anybody watching this, let your kids develop their own personality. You're going to
Let
love
your kids
watching it
be.
develop.
That's an amazing. You know what, Tom? I'm going to end it because that's the most perfect statement of
Can I ask
all.
you one
I
question?
am going to
Can I
end
ask
this.
you one question before you end?
Yes.
Unlearn 16. Where'd you get the title?
Well, it's very Socratic, right? So the whole idea of unlearning comes from Socrates. There's also a clothing company that came out during Pride. It was all about unlearning. And so this notion, and I feel very strongly about it, that whether we come from the best or the worst parent society, whatever, there's a lot of stereotypes and prejudice and ways of thinking that have been shoved in our head. Most psychiatrists and psychologists say by 5, a lot of your identity, a lot of who you're going to be gets formed either because of or in spite of. And my goal, I think, is to pull that stereotype out, pull the prejudice out, pull the predetermined ideas out as adults, examine them, find out how much you got to throw away and make room for new learning.
So basically, the title of your podcast is what we were just talking about. Let your kids develop their own personality.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And you can't, you can do it to the best that you can possibly do it, but your kid will be sitting, like you were talking about your father, right? Your kid's going to be sitting at that table. So there's pieces of that got put in there. There's pieces of my grandmother, you know, and I love her to death, but there's we all have these pieces from media from when we grow up that have been put in our heads. And it's our job to actively, purposefully pull them out of that. And I think the best way to do it is, yes, education, but B, more importantly, people. Diversifying who you talk to, who you surround yourself with, where you travel, and get to know people of all different colors and ethnicities and backgrounds and religions and everything. And the more of those people you talk to, the less you have room for, you know, that kind of garbage.
Absolutely.
And that's it, Tom. Yeah. So, guys, this is Tom Powell. So your TikTok is just at
Tom Powell Jr.
I'm going to put it below here.
Tom Powell Jr.
What's that? At Tom Powell Jr. on TikTok. Do you have anything else? You have a book that you said you want to
Everything
promote?
You can find out about me, you can just find out at my website, oldhippiemedia.com. My books, my podcast, all of it.
Amazing. And I will put all of that underneath. Thank you so much for hanging out. And I hope we can do another one. I think we should do a movie one next time.
You pick the topic, and I'm down to have another one of these anytime.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much, sir. And to our listeners and our viewers, have a great day. We'll see you next Tuesday.